Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we're going to explore those kind of common but sometimes just a little bit cringy situations we all face, like when you forget someone's name or you can't quite come up with that perfect everyday phrase.
hmm
And for this deep dive, we'll be using an excerpt from an English learning podcast as our guide.
Right.
So by the end, you'll have some new tools and insights to handle these moments, maybe with a little more grace and even a touch of humor.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're building a toolkit for better social fluency.
I like that. A toolkit. So this podcast episode, it jumps right into a scenario I think we've probably all experienced before. You run into someone and their name has completely vanished from your memory.
Ugh, this is the worst.
I know. Why does that happen? Is it just bad memories or something more going on?
It's rarely just a simple memory lapse.
Okay.
Think about it. When you first meet someone, you're often focused on so many other things, like what they look like, what they're saying,
Hmm.
even just the overall context of the meeting.
Right. You're taking it all in.
Exactly. So our brains, they prioritize all that new information, and sometimes, unfortunately, the name kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Interesting.
And this is actually related to something called context-dependent memory, which basically means our ability to recall information is influenced by the environment or situation we're in.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, for example, if you met someone at a loud party, you might have a harder time remembering their name later on, in a quiet office setting,
Oh, that's so true.
because the context is completely different.
Yeah. It's not that we're bad with names. It's just that our brains are like multitasking like crazy
Yeah, they're working overtime.
to process everything else.
Right.
But of course, in that moment when you realize you've forgotten someone's name, it can feel really awkward.
Oh, absolutely. And names are so powerful.
Yeah.
They represent individual identity and signify respect.
Right.
So forgetting someone's name, it can almost feel like you're dismissing their importance.
Yeah, like you don't care.
Right. No wonder we get flustered.
I know. But the podcast uses the phrase slip my mind, which I find kind of interesting.
Yes,
It's a gentle, almost humorous way to admit you've had a memory lapse.
it is. It's much better than panicking and making things worse.
Right. Like it's gone for a wander.
Exactly. And it seems like even the most fluent English speakers experience these moments.
Oh, for sure. And in the podcast, the host, Marco Call, he shares this funny anecdote about forgetting his own uncle's name at a family reunion.
Oh, no?
I know.
That's classic, though.
It is, and it makes me think that context really plays a huge role here.
It does. Family gatherings, especially those,
Yeah.
are often filled with unfamiliar faces, especially if you haven't seen some relatives in a while.
Right, right.
So your brain is just hit with this wave of new information.
Like sensory overload almost?
Yeah, and this can lead to something called cognitive overload, which is basically like your brain circuits are getting overloaded, making it harder to focus and retrieve information like names.
Okay, so it's not just me then who blanks on names in those situations.
We are not alone.
Oh, thank goodness. But okay, let's move on to some practical solutions.
Yes.
Because the podcast highlights a couple of everyday expressions that I thought were really helpful in a bit of a hurry, and contact details.
Okay.
So what makes those phrases so useful in these kinds of situations?
Well, they're great examples of subtle language that can really help smooth over potentially awkward interactions.
Right.
Saying, in a bit of a hurry, allows you to politely excuse yourself
Yeah.
without being too abrupt.
Right.
And focusing on contact details shifts the conversation to a future connection, implying that you value staying in touch.
It's like you're saying, I value this interaction, but I gotta run. Let's chat more later.
Exactly. Much better than fumbling over your words or, pretending you remember their name.
Yes. And what I love about this podcast is that it doesn't just point out the problem, it offers solutions.
Absolutely.
So what are some actual strategies for remembering names? Because let's face it, we've all been there.
We have. Well, one tip from the podcast's Fluency Builder section is to casually ask for a business card or for them to jot down their email,
Oh, that's smart.
because both of those usually have their full name.
Right.
Plus, it shows you're interested in staying connected.
That's pretty clever. Instead of making it about your memory, it becomes about wanting to stay in touch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if those options aren't suitable, try engaging them with a simple phrase like, "How's it going?"
Yeah.
And it buys you a moment to try and recall their name while appearing friendly and approachable.
Yeah, like you're not just standing there silently panicking.
Right.
And the best part is these are techniques you can start using immediately.
Yes.
So the next time you find yourself blanking on a name, you will have some tools ready to go.
You'll be prepared.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how this podcast goes beyond just, like vocabulary and grammar, and it really dives into the social dynamics of language.
Yeah.
Emphasizing that fluency isn't just about the technical stuff, it's about connecting with people,
Yeah.
in a meaningful way.
Right, and they make that point with a phrase that seems so simple. How's it going?
Right.
It seems casual, but it can make a big difference in how a conversation goes.
Huge difference compared to a more formal, how are you?
Yeah.
How's it going? It instantly creates this sense of camaraderie. Like
Yeah.
it subtly signals that you're on the same level.
Oh, like
It's
that.
very nuanced.
Yeah. And sometimes I get so caught up in the technical parts of language that I forget about those little nuances.
Me too.
So how's it going? Creates a more relaxed vibe.
Right.
But the podcast also mentioned that it can be a strategic tool if you're struggling to remember a name.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So how so?
Well, instead of that awkward silence while you're, frantically trying to remember their name.
Yeah.
How's it going? It gives you this natural way to re-engage and buy yourself some time.
Oh, that's good.
Keeps the conversation flowing while your brain tries to catch up.
Clever. You're subtly redirecting the focus
Yeah.
while giving your memory a little nudge. Okay, speaking of memory slip-ups, I'm curious, have you ever completely blanked on someone's name?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I think we all have at some point.
Okay, good. I'm not alone then.
No, you're not.
So what did you do?
Well, I remember being at a conference once and running into someone I'd met briefly before.
Uh-huh.
And their face was so familiar, but their name just wouldn't come to mind.
Ugh. I hate that feeling.
The worst.
It's like your mind goes completely blank
It does.
at the worst possible moment.
Right.
So what did you do?
Well, instead of trying to fake it, I just decided to be upfront.
Okay.
I said something like, "It's great to see you again, but please forgive me, your name has completely escaped me."
Wow. That's brave. I feel like it's so counterintuitive to just admit you've forgotten someone's name.
I know, but it worked out well.
Really?
They laughed and said they understood completely.
Oh, that's good.
And we reintroduced ourselves, and the conversation just flowed naturally from there.
That's a good reminder that honesty, even when it feels awkward, can actually make everyone feel more comfortable.
Totally. And it shows humility.
Yeah, which I think people appreciate.
It takes the pressure off and allows you to relax and actually enjoy the interaction.
I like that. Okay, so we've covered some great tips for handling those I've forgotten your name moments.
Right.
But what about those everyday phrases that we just can't seem to get right? Like the podcast mentioned in a bit of a hurry.
Yeah, in a bit of a hurry. It's a classic.
It is.
And it's such a fantastic example of how, subtle language choices can communicate a lot without being overly direct.
Right.
You're signaling that you need to wrap things up,
Yeah.
but you're doing it in a way that softens the blow and avoids sounding rude.
It's like a polite way of saying, I really need to go, but I don't want to offend you.
Exactly.
And I think what makes it so effective is the bit part.
Yes.
It downplays the urgency.
Right.
So it doesn't seem as abrupt.
Like you're saying, I wish I had more time, but
Yeah.
conveys that little bit of regret,
Uh-huh.
which makes it much more palatable.
Interesting. And, it's amazing how we pick up on these subtle language patterns without even realizing it.
I know, it's fascinating.
It's like we're constantly absorbing information about how to navigate social situations just through observation and experience.
It's true.
So it's not just about learning the words.
Right.
It's about understanding those unwritten rules of when and how to use them.
Yes.
It's like cracking a social code.
It is. And the more we pay attention to those subtle cues, the more confident and effective we become as communicators.
This episode also touches on something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and that's the idea of being terrible with something.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's names or numbers or directions.
Right.
Oh, I've definitely used that phrase myself.
Me too. It's very common.
And it's often used in a self-deprecating way, right?
Totally. Almost like a shield to deflect potential criticism.
Yeah, like, I know I should be better at this, but please cut me some slack.
Exactly.
Mm.
But what's interesting is how those self-perceptions can actually influence our behavior.
Oh, that's true.
If we believe we're terrible with names, for instance,
Right.
we might be less likely to even try to remember them.
Oh, yeah.
And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, we're giving ourselves permission to fail.
Exactly.
So our mindset can actually become a roadblock to improving our communication skills.
Absolutely.
That's a really important point.
It is.
If we're constantly telling ourselves we're bad at something, it's going to be that much harder to make any progress.
It is. And that raises a very important question.
What's that?
How can we shift our thinking from self-doubt to empowerment?
Well, the podcast gives us some practical strategies for remembering names, which is a great starting point.
Yeah.
But I also think it highlights the importance of self-compassion. We
Mhm.
need to be kinder to ourselves and recognize that everybody has strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's like we have to give ourselves permission to mess up every now and then because
Right.
we're all works in progress.
We are.
I think the takeaway here is to focus on effort over perfection.
Like, even if we don't remember every name or nail every phrase perfectly, the important thing is that we're trying. We're
Hmm.
putting ourselves out there.
And I think that's what this podcast does so well.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes the value of authentic, real-life communication.
Yeah.
It reminds us it's okay to be imperfect, to
Yeah.
stumble over our words, even to forget a name or two.
Because let's face it, those perfectly polished conversations that we see, in movies or on TV, they rarely happen in real life.
Never. It's all very scripted.
Right, exactly. And it's often in those unscripted, imperfect moments that true connection actually happens.
That's where the magic is.
Yeah, when we let go of the need to be perfect, we actually open ourselves up to genuine interaction.
So true.
Thinking back to Marco's story about forgetting his uncle's name at the family reunion,
Oh, yeah.
it was so relatable and funny, but it also made me think about how much context can really impact our memory.
It did. It was a perfect example of how cognitive overload can contribute to those memory slips.
Right.
When we're in unfamiliar environments or surrounded by lots of new faces,
Yeah.
our brains have to work harder to process all that information.
Yeah.
And sometimes that leads to forgetting a name.
So it's not necessarily that we're getting more forgetful as we get older.
Right.
It's that we're just bombarded with so much information these
It's
days.
true. Our brains are trying to keep up.
And that's why it's so important to be patient with ourselves and others. When
Absolutely.
these little memory slips happen,
Everyone deserves a little grace.
we're all human. We all have those moments where our brains just can't keep up.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to pose a question to you, our listener. What are your go-to strategies for handling those awkward social situations?
Yeah, we'd love to know.
Have you ever used a phrase like slipped my mind to kind of save the day?
Right, or maybe you have a secret technique for remembering names.
Yeah, tell us all about it, because ultimately, the best way to improve our communication skills is to learn from each other.
It really is.
Sharing those real-life stories and tips can help all of us navigate these situations with more confidence and maybe even a little humor.
For sure.
Like, we're all in this together, right? We've all had those moments of social awkwardness.
Absolutely.
And by sharing our experiences, we can learn from each other and support each other along the way.
Couldn't agree more.
So dive into the comments and let us know your thoughts.
Yes.
And until next time, remember that even though those little social hiccups can feel cringy in the moment, they're also opportunities for growth and connection.
Right.
And who knows, they might even make for a pretty funny story later on.
True that.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.